Dr. Dean Radin, one of the smartest men I have had the pleasure of getting to know. He is the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He, of course, also worked at the famed Bell Labs and has had his fingers all over top secret projects. Today, we're going to break down a whole host of things that touch on the power that you have within you to change your world, along with a whole bunch of new stuff and new studies that he has uncovered that are going to blow your mind. This is a masterpiece. Today's podcast is a masterclass in what you can do when you really put your mind towards things. He's going to break down exactly what you should do. I'm going to tell you that you need to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out thewayofwilljohn.com. Make sure to leave us a comment right down below on what you think. We love to see the discussions going on in the comment section. We will see you guys soon. Much love. Later.
Way of Will John.
I would love to give the viewers just an understanding. You, of course, have written a book called Real Magic, and the implications are otherworldly. So otherworldly that it just always blows my mind that they're not front page news on the TV every single second. But could we discuss then? I can't understand why this is not taking on. Why can't we, given we have so much anecdotal evidence for this, and excellent evidence as well, obviously highly well researched not according to some, obviously. I know there always find faults here and there. Be it as it may, these traditions and these things, they're so simple to get going, at least get started. I mean, they're very, you have to be very disciplined, obviously, to get somewhere with them. But like all practices, it's very easy. You don't need anything to get started on your meditation practice or your ritual magic practice, truly. Why don't we draw a connection between this and what's going on in our lives and our ability to affect the world around us? I don't understand why it's not commonplace.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and there is an answer. It's a little bit complicated because it involves history and taboos and fear. There's a lot of reasons why there's resistance to looking at this topic seriously, but that is changing, and it is changing very quickly. And so it is changing so quickly that since I wrote Real Magic, I actually finished that in 2017, was published in 2018, I've written another book, which will come out next year, which I'm just calling Enchantment. And it's documenting how, even since I wrote that book on magic only 5 years ago or so, a very significant change is happening within the scientific world, science and scholarship. And the change is in a direction where much of the previous resistance is dropping away. And so I'll have to give a short riff here on why there's so much resistance. So we need to go back 500 years. 500 years ago, actually a little bit longer than that, but one of the largest catastrophes in the history of the world was the Black Plague in 1500s. The Black Plague is estimated to have killed 30% of the world's population, something like 200 million people, mostly in Europe, but it wiped out a lot of people. At that time, the church was the primary authority in terms of both the spiritual side and the physical world, and a lot of people were praying and nothing was happening. And so a lot of people began to question the power of religion, and the only answer that the church could give for something like that was it's God's will. But it was affecting everyone. There were just as many people killed who were poor as who were royalty at the time. And so it began to incur doubts in people. So that was one thing. One of the consequences of that was the rise of science. Because as a result of monitoring why are these people sick and those people are not sick, that was the beginning of empirical science. We said, well, we're not going to just take somebody's word for why this is happening. Let's see if we can figure it out. So that was one of the stimuli that created science. So we now move ahead a century or two, and you have science and religion kind of on parallel tracks. But by far, the most authority was still in the church. The church relied on supernatural ideas, the divine, including magic. So most Orthodox religions completely accept that magic is real. They place it into the area of the supernatural or the divine. So somewhere around 1600 and something, I can't remember the exact date, but the Catholic Church was already beginning to see that this is the beginning of science as we know it today. Science had continually gotten better and better, but the Catholic Church had the authority, and they told the scientists, and I'm talking specifically about Galileo. There were other scientists who were also captured by the Inquisition, but Galileo made a strategic move where he said that science would focus and only be considered science on the objective physical world.
TheWayOfWillJohn.com. Exclusive content and programs on manifestation, making money, hidden knowledge. Finally, reach your full potential.
The church would take care of everything on the spiritual side, by which they meant everything having to do with the mind. So mind, psychology, religious ideas, spiritualism, and so on. That was the church. And so you scientists, you can do the rest of it, but do not step on us. Well, the very first thing that happens then, that within the scientific realm, we don't do anything that's considered supernatural. We're completely focused on the natural world. That excludes magic. Meanwhile, the church is saying, yeah, magic is real, but only if done by our priests. If it's done by anybody else, the Inquisition will kill you, which they did with great effectiveness.
Yeah.
So you have two taboos that start right from the very beginning, hundreds of years ago. Science is saying this is not part of science, don't do this. And that also then goes into scholarship. So in the academic world, we don't pay any attention to that stuff. That's supernatural. We're only interested in natural. And meanwhile, the church is saying there is magic, but outside of the church, it is demonic. In the Catholic Catechism, it is demonic. So stay away from it. So you have two taboos that start hundreds of years ago, and they echo to the present day. You can see it very clearly in the academic world and in the religious world. Don't do it. Meanwhile, you have all of the people out there who, for one reason or another, are having experiences, typically not evoked by anything. People have experience of telepathy and precognition and so on. It is affiliated with, in the public and the scientific and church's mind, no, this is part of magic. This is supernaturalism, because from a scientific perspective, the philosophical assumptions that are used within science don't know how to explain it. And if something is not easily explained within science, there's two ways of dealing with it. One is that it's heaped a huge amount of criticism on it, saying it cannot be, literally impossible, or it says we're going to ignore that now, and you should ignore it too because it's not science. I've actually had articles describing experiments that we've done submitted to journals that are rejected, not because they found any flaws, but because they said this isn't science. To which, I'm using scientific methods with the same techniques and everything, and what? Well, yeah. That's where it comes from. It's considered not science. So you have very strong taboos that have been sustained for a long time. Sociologists have called this the disenchantment of the world. The world became disenchanted. So partially from the push of science, and this is during the Enlightenment, roughly 1600s, 1700s. So the Enlightenment pushed magic farther and farther away. It kind of got really shoved into the Orthodox religion and stayed there and basically could not escape. But from the rest of the world became more and more secular, and civilization then grew under these assumptions, which is materialism. It's the idea that everything is made out of matter, it's all physical. This is why, even to the present day, most neuroscientists assume that consciousness is due to brain activity. That it's equated. You are your brain. All of your experience is your brain. And that's the end of the story. Well, you can then see how somebody has a telepathic experience and they're picking up something about a friend who happens to be 1,000 miles away and turns out to be correct. Neuroscience doesn't know what to do with that. So if you track the history of skepticism in this field, it goes through different phases. The current phase of skepticism is, yes, the evidence looks okay and it seems to be repeatable and all that, but it's impossible. And because it's impossible, we simply won't accept it. I mean, that is literally now the way that skeptics respond. That is impossible, therefore there must be something wrong, even though we can't specify what it is.
And that is not going to be sustainable. I know what you mean. That sort of stance that seems quite stubborn because we felt as if we had it figured out is not going to be able to hold up, because people are going to continue to have experiences as they have been, and this, as you're testing it, is going to continue to test into these. It's going to prove that there seems to be this effect. And I want to go back on, because I didn't get to ask a question about your original study. Would it be a crazy jump to say then, I'm drawing an absurd conclusion, to say that a meditator who has an excellent understanding of ritual magic would be like a Michael Jordan in the world? Would it be safe to say that could be the case?
Most of the magicians are also meditators, because to be an effective magician, you need to achieve the state of gnosis, Gnosis. So gnosis, if you just look at it from a different perspective, that is samadhi within the yogic traditions. It's a deep form of meditation. And the reason is that, just as it is with virtually any kind of, whether it's in the yogic tradition or the Western esoteric traditions, the magic, the psychic stuff does not happen at the level of conscious awareness. It happens way below that, metaphorically. It happens at a very deep state of awareness. For most people, most of the time, it's happening in the unconscious, and then something happens to bring it to the level of awareness, and that's how we have spontaneous psychic experiences. But what's happening, as best as we can tell at this point, it's happening far below the level of awareness. So effective magicians do some kind of exercise which could look exactly like meditation, and oftentimes it is. It's the same thing.
Are you familiar with Robert Monroe? You must be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure how long you've been practicing. Did you ever get a chance to meet him? Were you ever in circles with him?
No, I've been to the Monroe Institute, and
Okay.
I've met people there, and I'm well acquainted with their methods. I took the Gateway program, so yeah, I know about it.
All right, yeah, that's all I was gonna get at, because obviously these guys are meditating and they're learning ritual magic, and they go hand in hand. Well, then the most logical conclusion is, well, how is one training through that? And, we've had on Tom Campbell, who's also been a member of the things there at the Monroe Institute, and discussed things with him. But hemisync was a way that hemisync. I think is it hemisphere synchronization? I believe is that what it entirely goes for. But the idea, creating this brain coherence, I don't know if it was his idea or not to include the brain and things like this, even though he's having these experiences that seem to be outside of the brain. But what have you found to be, if you have found any of the common themes between the people who are training to get good at this? Do they use guided meditations and hemisync? Do they only follow their breath? Are they only interested in the hermetic, practices? Do they follow some ancient Egyptian? What are people doing in order to start to move down that path? What sort of commonalities do you find from the people that have success?
The answer is all of the above. There is no single path. As you know, that when somebody's starting out on a path of meditation, they say, well, what's the best method? And the answer is the best method for you. People are different. So I've learned many different meditation techniques over the years, starting from transcendental meditation and every other kind you can imagine. I've kind of settled in on Vipassana, which is otherwise known as insight meditation. It's very, very simple, based on paying attention to the breath. But then after a while, you can almost imagine this huge scattershot of different methods that all begin to devolve into the same thing. Once you get past the monkey mind that keeps you distracted all the time, you get to a place of quiet, in which case that place of quiet is the same for each one of these different methods. So it's not clear to me that there is any one method that is better. What works is best. The other thing is, you mentioned about training. So in training, you see this definitely when people are learning something like remote viewing, that people can get better. There are certain things you can do to learn how to get better at it. Metaphor that I like to use is somebody says they want to learn how to play tennis. And so they're watching people, but they haven't watched them closely. So they're playing tennis and they go to a teacher and they say, this game is ridiculously difficult. Like, how do I learn how to do this? They say, well, show me what you're doing with the racket. So they show them, and they've been holding the net side and trying to hit it like a basketball, like a baseball. And so the teacher says, well, why don't you try it this way? Hold the skinny side and hit it with the net. And they say, oh, wow, that's a lot easier now. That kind of tips and tricks from a teacher can tell somebody, if you want to do remote viewing or some other psychic task, this is a step in that direction. But ultimately, it depends on natural talent. So some people will get to Wimbledon. Sure, they practice a lot, but they also have talent. And so you can't train for talent. You either have it or you don't. The same is true in this domain. It's true for developing a psychic ability or magical ability, that you can learn the various steps. But even among the Tibetan lamas who may spend their entire lives doing meditation, some will achieve amazing things. Others won't. And they're both meditating for 30 years, so there's something about talent that matters. And as I said, we have ideas about where talent comes from, but it's not something you can train for, at least not yet.
Sure. And I mean, it's always clear that even if you don't have talent, just like you're saying, the fact that you can get better probably shouldn't put anyone off from trying.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, anybody can learn to some extent. We all have the raw capacity because we're sentient creatures. So yes, we can get from 0 to some number. If 10 is Merlin, the magician, anybody can get from 0 to 1, just applying yourself. People with talent will get from 0 to 1 extremely fast and probably jump up to 5 almost immediately, whereas others can spend decades and may never achieve up to a level 5.
I find it so fascinating because just a small anecdote, but there was I was having out-of-body experiences from a young age, teenager age, and I didn't know what they were. And of course didn't share that with anyone. I knew that was it was a weird thing. I just didn't understand what it was and just kind of put it at the back of my head and just continued on with my life. It wasn't until I was around 28, roughly, that I was able to completely understand and know that other people were having these things and that there was systems behind it and a whole history and just, I'm far from weird. As a matter of fact, I'm very normal. And so then what, of course, happens to an athletic brain is one starts to delve into it and then set up a little system and go. I got obsessed with it for a month. And I don't think I was able to convey this to you in our last talk, but I got so obsessed with it that I was virtually meditating almost 3 to 4 times a day before training, or when waking up, after training, 6 o'clock before food, before bed, and then falling asleep while also doing a practice. I mean, it was an absolute obsession. All of my absolute otherworldly, and we're talking truly otherworldly events and things that happened within this roughly month period, in which case I was otherworldly obsessed with it. That level of commitment probably took me from, like you're saying, to 0 to, who knows, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is on the scale. It definitely took me past 1. And there were a whole host of things that I engaged in to do it. But it eventually fell off because I couldn't maintain that level of practice. That's what really, really did it. But I'm also just amazed at how simple the consistency of doing it for 30 days was like. It was like, being an ant and then turning into a lion. I was having synchronicities and understandings, and memory retention was easy. Speaking other languages was very easy. Just you could just run down the list. You're not anxious. You're not this. You're better. I scored the best goal of the season that month as well. Like, you could just run down a list, and I'm sure I'm forgetting things. And so I also love talking to people like you, because I hope it inspires people to go, you don't need to be as obsessed as I am. You could take it 5 years. There's no reason for you to just do it so abruptly. But I don't know if you've ever had a period of your life where you've experienced that or seen that sort of jump in things, happening.
Yeah, a case can be made that this intensive period of practice that you went through actually is important for making a step up. Because if you do what is probably common in the Western world, you might meditate 20 minutes and maybe do it twice a day. That certainly will help. And from a physiological and cognitive perspective, we know that people will definitely become calmer and your health will improve and a bunch of things like that. Slowly, to a certain extent, if you do the level of practice that you're talking about, that supercharges what's going on. It makes it not simply faster, but I think gets to a higher level.
One of the most important things that I have learned interviewing all of these high performance leaders is that clarity of mind is crucial to your success. And what good is clarity of mind without clarity of sound? Which is why today's podcast is sponsored by Rode. We across Golarami use exclusively Rode audio equipment in order to do all of our stuff. If you are an influencer, if you're just a person out there trying to make some good content for your stuff at home, wherever it is, Rode is by far the best audio partner we have ever had. We have been using their stuff for almost 5 years now. Has never let us down. Truly incredible company, especially with all of the other affordable things that you guys can get from them. Check out the link right down below and enjoy the rest of this podcast.
So if you live in a cave and that's your job, okay, if somebody else is taking care of you somehow, which is traditionally what would happen in an ashram, well, fine. Then you can actually achieve things which we would consider to be on the edge of miraculous. Most people can't do that anymore. So then, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to spend 5 hours a day doing various kinds of meditation and practice? As a professional athlete, you're sort of doing that anyway. In your profession, you kind of have to in order to maintain a level of world class. You have to do that. Well, there's also world class in this domain. That too will take 5 to 6 hours of practice every day, and an extremely strict regimen of being able to do that. So there's one. So I recommend to people that if they want to do this kind of thing, they do it through meditation. Because it will work. Even small amounts, you'll begin to notice synchronicities and lots of other things that you wouldn't otherwise notice. But there is a way to do it in roughly 20 minutes that I don't recommend. And that's taking DMT or 5-MeO-DMT. That will blast you, whether you like it or not. It'll blast you into those realms. And in the space of 20 minutes, you will come out of that experience a different person. So, a non-significant proportion of people who have that experience will become psychotic because it's so fast. It's such a major step function into that space that most minds simply can't take it. And so they'll go crazy, literally. They'll become psychotic and stay there. So you don't want that step function. You want one. The reason why meditation is so much better is because it's really slow, and eventually you get higher and higher. But in the meantime, you're able to integrate what's happening. If you take one of these psychedelics, you're not prepared. You don't know what's going to happen. So, yeah. So and traditionally, you might take a psychedelic as a monk who's been meditating for 30 years. You would take something like one of these super blasting kinds of psychedelics. You might not even notice that anything happened, because you're so used to that. There's this story that Ram Dass used to say when Ram Dass was taking LSD and was having all these amazing experiences, and he wanted to see what would happen when he gave it to his guru. So his guru took a huge amount of LSD and had no response. He said, yeah, that's okay. I understand what that is. And so this is what happens if you spend 30 years preparing for it, as opposed to some kid who's taking it as a party drug. That is dangerous.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you is I've run into an interesting practice in several different sectors that I think you'd be able to shed some light on potentially. We had just recently on Grandmaster Timothy Hogan, who is working with the Templars, the Grandmaster of the Templars, I guess. We have had on Grandmaster Wolf, who I know you're familiar with, and I've seen a whole host of other, I guess I shouldn't say gurus, but other practices where they're referring to a type of practice in which case they will either slow the heart down, so their heart rate down extremely, or they'll get it to the point of potentially even artificially having their heart pumped in order for them to be able to stay out, meaning stay out. To allow themselves to stay in an altered state of consciousness, because one thing that is obviously we know what happens at near-death experiences. People generally tend to have these wild, or they actually die, or as we call it, die. And certain functions of the body stop. Well, this is supposedly, obviously, or allegedly allowing them to then lengthen that experience, to bring more back, and to go into, and Grandmaster Wolf even mentioned doing something with the vagus nerve that he used to do when he was younger, or when, he was just learning things like this, and they would knock themselves out to essentially, and that would just put them in this altered state of consciousness immediately. Number one, have you heard of any things like that? Do you know if there are studies or people that are trying to do things like that, basically put themselves in these sorts of states of consciousness in order to bring something back? And is that a greater experience? And is that just kind of like the DMT thing, just a snap, poof, and you're there? Like, what is really going on there?
When you do a scientific study, and you want to publish the results, you get a grant or something, and you're obligated to publish the results. To do that, when you're working with human subjects, you need to have an institutional review board, which looks at the ethics of the thing you're going to do. And they compare the risk to the subjects involved versus the benefit. And there's all kinds of rules. This is true in every country now. I sit on one of the institutional review boards, and I've done so for years. All kinds of people are on these boards, from the public, from the science, sometimes from religion. Big ethical arguments happen sometimes, where the board has to typically, unanimously agree that this looks like the risk is worth it. Anytime any risk comes up, somebody's always going to object, and you can't work with children except under unusual circumstances, and you can't work with medical things and drugs and whatever except under unusual circumstances, which cause a lot of debate. So when it comes to something like, let's slow down the heart and turn it off for a while so people can explore the inner worlds, you don't find very many published articles on that, because it would definitely bump up against an ethics board. That means that the kind of research going on is going to be private, or it's going to be people doing it outside of a system where they will then publish it in journals, because they can't get permission to do that, to say nothing of where they're going to get money to do these experiments. The research costs money just like anything else does. So I pay a lot of attention to the published literature, because among other things, it means that the others have looked at the researchers being presented to try to vet, is this credible or not? For the what might be called the sub rosa experiments, many of which are very interesting but never get published, well, where do you even find out about them? Well, maybe they're published in books occasionally, or you find it on a blog. There's simply not enough time to spend. You could easily spend all day just surfing the web looking at stuff. I have so much to do in my regular jobs, I can't do that. So it doesn't bubble up to my level of awareness where I could speak about that sort of thing with any kind of expertise.
Gotcha.
I know that people have done that. Sure,
right.
People will get hemisync takes and play 4 days in a row, and will that produce an altered state? Absolutely. And then they'll take DMT and blast it even further, and there are all kinds of very interesting stories. The machine elves, and meeting characters that you have met before that other people met, and they pass messages, and all kinds of very, very strange things are going on that become very difficult after a while to be able to even understand, right? Suggests we are saturated with other entities all the time, permeated everywhere. Well, other than the experiences that people report, which are interesting, how do we take the next step and figure out in some kind of rigorous empirical way that what is being reported is what it appears to be? Because it may not be. Like when you're blasted out of your body, you're not using the ordinary senses, so the ordinary language doesn't work very well either, which is why mystics say, I can't explain to you what it means to feel like I'm one with the universe. Right? I can use those words, but that's not what it is. It's something else. So I just this morning got an email from an Eastern esoteric group that are saying that they appreciate what can be done with scientific methods in studying psychic and magical phenomena, but it's picking up a tiny little bit of what's going on. So they're proposing that from an introspective or a contemplative approach, that you can learn much more about what's actually going on. You learn this much of what's going on. But how to translate that into what we understand from a scientific perspective is very, very difficult. And we don't know how to do that yet. So they're proposing, well, maybe we should collaborate and figure it out. So I thought, well, okay, that's a good idea.
One of the other things that is hard to understand, and I know this from everybody who's tried, you explained in our last discussion an understanding of how to maybe put a spin on your thoughts and your emotions in order to get something to tend the universe to give you what you want, or to put things in your favor. You know, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you get what you want, but that you will, by doing these things or this practice, put things more in your favor had you done them than not. And one of the tough things that you had explaining was this sort of spin. And I just kind of wanted to revisit just the process of trying to utilize your own mind to get what you want, be that a new job, money, peace, whatever it is that you're trying. And then I have a follow-up question after that. But if maybe you could just give us a rehash of what it would take to do to manifest something that you would want.
Yeah, this is based both on the classical yoga methods to develop the siddhis, which are the yogic powers, which are identical to psychic powers, which are identical to magical powers. It's so similar also to what magicians will do in the state of gnosis, which is the same as samadhi. So different names and labels are given based on culture, but the underneath it is in a very deep state of awareness, hopefully at the point where individual thoughts have subsided and you can sort of sit in a state of just awareness. So the awareness without thoughts, which you're not used to that. It sounds, well, what does that even mean? But nevertheless, you can get there. So what I meant by spin is in the sitting in a state of awareness is a matter of attention. You're attending to apparently nothing other than awareness. So spin is a metaphor because you're now doing something in this state where normally there's nothing happening. It's just awareness. So some meditators will say a state of pure awareness with nothing happening. Well, now something has to happen. So the something that's happening is intention, right? You're still there as a person. You can just sit and float in that state of pure awareness, but you want something to happen. So I describe it as a spin because, and it is a metaphor. It is using intention to push. Like yes, I'm sitting in this placid sea, but I want to actually go over there. So I find it just easier from almost a symbolic way to think of it as that's my intention, like just pushing it a little bit. Because otherwise, if you imagine you're sitting on a little boat in some completely placid, infinite lake, how do you get anywhere? Well, if you're just sitting there, you don't get anywhere, which is fine. I mean, it's a perfectly fine place to sit. But if you want to achieve something over there, you have to do something to get there. So if you imagine you're sitting on a boat and you want to move if you start pushing the boat's just going to rock back and forth. So what do? Well, if you spin, it'll actually impart a little bit of motion to it. And that motion, if you do it just right, spinning not circularly but elliptically, you can start nudging it a little bit. That's why I use this metaphor of a spin. That you're sitting in this state of pure awareness and you have an intention in mind. And in the yogic world, you would say, well, one of the siddhis is to gain the strength of an elephant. Okay, so you have this idea, I want the strength of an elephant while sitting in samadhi. That's the concept that you hold. And so I'm thinking of it as nothing is happening, but now I imagine just a little bit of a vortex with that particular intention that will eventually make it happen. That's in a sense the manifestation process within classical yoga. It's not that different within magical practice too, except that a lot of magical practices have all kinds of ritual involved, but ultimately it's the same thing.
It reminds me of Neville Goddard's, I'm not sure if you're familiar with who he is. Okay. His state akin to sleep, right? SATS, as many people talk about it, because what's so fascinating about his work, and I've read every single one of his books actually, is that it's such a simple portion of, let's say, his procedure, one of many methods that he has, but it's so overlooked by modern culture, thinking that they don't need to first be in this spot. And while it may be that we are constantly manifesting and having an effect on the world, like you're saying, you have a much greater effect while you're sitting within this place of complete peace, calm, and awareness, this place of awareness, where your attention is from. And then from that state, he then wants you to hold simply one thought. He obviously has a whole host of different other things, but he would say, if you have one thing that you want, he would say, if what would seal the deal is you shaking the hand of the business partner, then you do that and you redo it and you redo it and you redo it in this, and that's it. You don't go shake his hand and then go to lunch and then go to he would just say, that's it. And you just redo that. And I found that to be the most fascinating and useful, but also tough in some degrees at the beginning, because the mind does want to pull away and to proceed on with things. But as you hold that, what I've also found so crucial to it and interesting is that you get better at that picture of the feeling the hand and saying thank you, or I'm so happy, or whatever it is that you do. But it's so important not to skip that step. And do you find that, and is it true, I guess I should ask, that meditators can achieve that or are always in that state of being? Or I've seen these studies that show meditators able to achieve wild frequencies. I guess I lack the nomenclature, but in a second, they've been meditating for 30 years and they can just be happy or put themselves asleep. That is the case, or is that same ability?
Well, it's slightly different, but yes, you get better facility in being able to direct the mind. Rather than being at the effect of the mind, you can affect what state you're in. I know this is true for people who are expert at remote viewing, for example. They can get so good at it that they can do expert level remote viewing while driving a car or having lunch. So it's all a matter of learning a state that you drop into very quickly, and then after a while, you don't need to do anything. Basically, you just know where to go. So your description reminded me that of the various things that you would do at these deep states involves imagination. Right? You're imagining what it is that you want. That is another way of then saying what I was using the term spinning. That you spin an intention that you want something. Well, you can imagine it as well, because now you're still sitting in this boat in this placid ocean that goes forever, but you can imagine something. You can simply imagine the boat is now moving. That would also work. Well, so in working on my book Enchantment, which as I said will come out next year, I found that there are 9 different factors that, and I'm not going to be able to remember all 9 now because I don't have them in front of me, but There's 9 factors that you see again and again and again in both in the magical traditions and the yogic traditions and in people in the New Thought realm. They say the same thing. So it's attention for sure, intention, imagination, belief is typically number one. Because if you're starting out some kind of ritual to manifest fill in the blank, and internally you're doing all of the steps, but you're thinking, this is stupid. This is not going to work. Don't even bother. Like you need to have 100% confidence that what you're doing is going to work. That's not so easy for somebody starting out because they may not have any experience telling them that this could work. So what do you do then? Well, you do what you do when you go see a superhero movie, right? You don't sit there start criticizing every moment that they're doing something. You suspend your disbelief. So you do the same kind of thing here. You suspend your disbelief and just say, well, for the next 30 minutes, I completely believe that what I'm doing now is going to work. That's not quite as easy as it sounds, because to completely believe something that you don't actually believe, it takes practice to do that too. So you would eventually learn that you can suspend your disbelief, and it's really only important during the ritual itself. Like outside the ritual, you can collapse back into every man who thinks is all stupid. But during that practice, if you want it to work, then you have to have complete belief in it. So there are other factors like that. Like another one is the likelihood that it would happen all by itself. It's the probability of the event that you want to occur. So the example I use there is the gold-plated Mercedes. So I want a gold-plated Mercedes. That is the enchantment that I want. And so what would need to happen? Like in the everyday world, what has to happen for that to occur? Well, a lot of people are involved. A lot of money is involved. The probability that it would simply happen because I wanted it is pretty low. But it could happen. It's not a zero probability. It's just pretty low. So I was mentioning this in a discussion once and said that one of the other aspects of what you want is the clarity of what you want. You have to be really, really clear. And if you're not completely clear, the universe will give you what you wanted, but it may not be exactly what you wanted. So an acquaintance of mine who happens to be a witch said in one of the shows, did you get the gold-plated Mercedes? I said, not yet. So she sent one to me. So there it is. It is a Mercedes. It's not gold, but it's a gold color. And so she said, well, now you have it. And it's a good lesson that I didn't specify that I wanted an actual car to be able to ride. I just said a gold-plated Mercedes. Well, there it is. So now that intentional loop has been closed. So the universe is okay again. So if you wanted to do something in the beginning stages, certainly with magic, you say, well, in my book, I say, I find a $10 bill laying on the ground. And apparently just there. It just, who knows how it got there. That is going to happen much, much more frequently even for psychological reasons, because now you're paying attention to it. But the likelihood that manifestation will happen is so much greater than a gold-plated Mercedes that if you're starting out, probably not a good idea to start with something that is a priori an extremely low probability, even though it can happen.
Yeah, that's in what strikes me definitely, and I've heard the term, the universe is a mirror, and clarity being such an interesting thing. I've also fallen prey to that in my life as well, not being so clear, and then realizing, this is what I'd been obsessing over and thinking over, but it's not exactly what I wanted, but it's because I didn't really say what I wanted. But I wanted to ask something that I've never heard you discuss, I don't think, at least, is how are we all doing this now within the collective consciousness, though? Because if I want the gold Mercedes, or if there's only one, or, and we all, this tends to be a thought that comes up to people. I don't have too many thoughts about this, but I know people do. If I want this red car, if I want to win a game, and you want to win a game, is the person who wins the game just simply the one with the like we said, the Michael Jordan of manifesting? Or how does that work? What does that interplay look like? I don't even know if we have begin to understand what that is.
Yeah, it becomes a chaotic mishmash, right? You have clashing intentions now. And I think one of the reasons why in the magical tradition, sorcerers are very, very quiet about who they are and what they do, because you don't want clashed intentions. So even when we do an experiment in our own lab, we don't like to give tours. We don't like to let people know exactly what we're doing while it's going on. And we don't, and for exactly the same reason why in a biology lab you don't want dirty test tubes, right? We're working with an ingredient. Well, the ingredient in this case is intention and clarity and all the rest of it, magical stuff. Well, you keep it clean afterwards. And here's a tricky thing here, because within the psychic and magical realms, time is not what we have on our clock. So future intentions can affect things that are happening in the present. Time sort of goes everywhere. It's non-local in space and time. So that creates what the jargon in the field is a divergence effect. That if you have an experimental result and now you publish it, and a lot of people in the future are looking at it and saying, that's stupid. That can't work. Well, that might be able to affect what was happening when the experiment was underway. So do you completely reveal everything and you give all your data and everything at that point? Well, it's a question, because you're now working against a potentially very large number of people in the future who might be able to influence something in the past. So it's not that the past can be changed as best as we can tell. What happens, at least experimentally, we see this happen sometimes, that what is unfolding in the present is influenced both by what was happening in the past. That's like thinking of it as a psychokinetic effect pushing forward. But it's also affected by something in the past, these influences, in the future, influences that are affecting what is happening now. So that it's like a constantly moving in both directions, this influence. I think that's one of the reasons why when we do studies on various kinds of psychic effects, that the results are not both trivial to get, that it's non-trivial, and why it's very difficult to repeat. Because you do something, get amazing results, and then nobody can repeat it again. Why? Because you have all these people who are now thinking, that's stupid. That can't work. Because they saw that, and now when you do your experiment now, you say, well, it's not working anymore. Well, why not? So, yeah, I have much more sympathy and understanding for the traditional sorcery techniques, which are done in caves or in a closet somewhere, and then you don't tell anybody anything. Mm-hmm. So that's one piece. The other piece is what you just mentioned, which is if you have 1 million people all wanting to win the lottery, well, that's not going to happen. You're pushing against all kinds of things. Well, if somebody has a stronger push, will they do a little bit better? Yes, but it's still all probabilistic. So people ask me all the time, how can I win the $1 billion lottery? Well, you can use magical techniques and probably improve your odds by a factor of 10, which is amazing. But that still means it's like 100 million to 1, right? You're not going to get down to 1 to 1. So the probability of something is another very important key to whether or not something happens.
I imagine. I can imagine also that your life is never not busy. And as we were just discussing before we got started, you had, I guess, published a paper or done some things. Maybe you could just get us straight into that.
Sure. So I submitted the article of an experiment that took about a year to complete. So one of the strange differences between classical physics and quantum physics is known as the quantum observer effect. And this is the observation that when you observe a quanta, a particle or object of the quantum scale, that its behavior changes when you observe it. And this has raised the question of what does it mean to observe, to measure at the quantum scale. And so the one way of expressing the difference and using fancy philosophical terms is that in the everyday world, our epistemology is independent from our ontology. So what that means is our ways of knowing things are independent of the things in of themselves. So that we assume there's a world out there somehow, it has some kind of reality with a large R, and the way that we observe it is not changing reality. That is not the case in the quantum world. And yet we live in the quantum world. It's like quantum all the way up and down. So the quantum observer effect is asking the question of whether or not there's something peculiar about human consciousness, human observation, that when we observe something, that it changes the physical nature of that object. That seems to be one of the interpretations of what's happening in quantum mechanics. So one of the ways that I've been testing this now since 2008 in many experiments was to use a double-slit optical system, which is like Physics 101, it's an easy way of demonstrating the wave and particle-like nature of light. You set up a double-slit system and you have somebody imagine with their mind's eye that they could see which of the two slits the photon goes through. Because if you could do that, you gain what's called which path information. You gain the path of the photon. That forces the photon's position to be known. That changes it from a wave to a particle. And it's pretty easy to demonstrate that. So all we did in this experiment is we asked people to imagine with their mind's eye that they could see this, in which case does it change the interference pattern at all? And the answer is it looks like it does. So there's direct evidence of a mind-matter interaction at the quantum scale, which is important for a number of reasons. One is that it's interesting all by itself. The second is that it informs the many interpretations of quantum mechanics, because there's something like 12 or 13 different interpretations of what it means. And this one is suggesting, as some physicists have predicted, that there's something peculiar about human consciousness that is not quite physical. It may be related to brain activity, but it doesn't seem to be limited by brain activity. So those were those experiments. So the new experiment that I did was, rather than using a double-slit optical system, I used a diffraction grating system. So the difference is that a diffraction grating has 500 lines per millimeter. So it's a huge number of lines as compared to two slits. So the nice thing is when you shine a laser through that, you don't get a complicated interference pattern anymore. You just get individual dots of light. So the central dot, if you're using a transparent diffraction grating, the laser will go right through it. And that's kind of like the particle-like nature of light, because it's not showing any diffraction. But the dots on either side, there's two dots, and there's dots going out forever. But the central one and the two on either side are pretty bright. So you have a fairly easy way of measuring how much interference is going on, how much wave-like behavior, because you just need to put a photodetector behind one of the side dots, and the illumination level tells you how much wave-like behavior is going on. So I made a device based on this, and I recruited 50 people around the world, half of whom were experienced meditators, and half of whom were experienced magical practitioners. And the idea was to, first of all, see if we get any effect at all, and second, is there a difference in the ability to do this task from the meditators versus the magicians? And all of the previous tests, we were looking for meditators, because meditators have a practice of being able to control their attention, and this task requires that you have good ability to control your attention, because you're asked to first attend with your mind to the target and then withdraw your mind from the target. So you have to be practiced in knowing what that means. And magicians do something similar, except meditators generally think of their attention as inwards, whereas magicians think of their attention as outwards, especially if they're doing enchantment type magic. So that was the comparison that I was looking at. Overall, the magicians did significantly better than the meditators. Yeah, so this is very interesting now, because it ties together something which is extremely ancient, namely esoteric magic, with extremely modern, namely interpretations of quantum mechanics. And it shows that the two elements which seem to be as far apart in a spectrum as you can possibly get actually might be useful, because you can learn something about this. So we pre-registered the method of analysis, and we jumped through lots of hoops in order to find the right people on this. And the fact that the magicians using the pre-registered method of analysis did better than the meditators is, I think, quite interesting. So I just submitted the article to a physics journal, and we'll see whether they jump for joy or start screaming and have their head explode. So I don't know what the answer is yet.
Yeah, it's fascinating for sure. I am very curious about the magical practitioners, though. What sort of magic are we talking about? I mean, are we talking, these are people who are into ritual magic? Is this, what is their focus? Now, meditator is easy for me to understand given what I know, but I feel like magic has an infinite number of ways to be interpreted. What are they doing?
I didn't specify in high detail what kind of magic that they should do. Most people, when we talk about magic, they're involved in enchantment in some way. They're spell casting, that sort of thing, which is all about, I want my intention to be impressed into the world in some way. So it is an outward focus of attention and intention. The acronym that I selected for this project was SIGIL, SIGIL, Scientific Investigation of Gazing with Intuition at Light. But of course, sigil is one of the many magical techniques for doing enchantments or doing spellcasting. So when people saw that, then many of the people said that they had been using sigils, they'd been using other kinds of enchantment techniques. And so, I didn't specify exactly what they had to do, but they had to know about it and have been using it for years.
Yeah, but the time thing, if I may, is otherworldly, though, because what you're saying essentially is that I could also, and I feel like this is the first place I ever saw it, is go take a test, or I could have a test coming. I could say, I'm not going to study for that test. What I'm going to do is, as soon as the test is done, I'm going to take 6 weeks and I'm going to learn everything that could possibly be done about this subject. And would it then be possible to pass that test in any way? Or would it just simply be that I would do better on that test than I would if I then, for the next 6 weeks after I've taken it, studied? Like, would that really be the case? Or is it possible to say, next year I'll learn French and then walk up to somebody right now, start speaking French?
Well, that experiment has been done. That is an experiment. So Daryl Bem is a retired psychologist from Cornell University, and he came up with something he called an implicit precognition test, one of which is exactly what you just described. You take a test, and then later you study the right answers. And so you then can compare, well, how would you have done if you didn't study it in the future? Well, people do better under the conditions that you're saying. If you study really hard after the test, that seems to ripple backwards in time and improve your answers in the present, which is what, like any form of precognition, is suggesting that somehow something in the future is rippling backwards. And so it's true in that case. It's true in lots of different ways of seeing the same phenomenon, that the present is influenced both by the past and the future. Our experience says it's influenced more by the past, but if it's influenced at all, like anything other than zero, by the future, that's still a factor.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I would obviously love to keep going. I think you're good on time just now, right? So I appreciate it. Of course, we have plenty of links for you and your books. I really look forward to, you'll definitely have to come back on once the book comes out. I would love to talk about it, or when you're starting to promote it, just let us know. Is there any place specifically, though, that you'd like to send people?
Well, I send people either to my website, deanradin.com, or to the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is noetic.org. I'm also now the co-founder and chairman of a genetic engineering company where we are creating a therapeutic for mild cognitive impairment and dementia. This sounds way far away from my other work, to work in genetic engineering, but there is a connection. So the connection is, and one of the many projects that we're doing at our institute is we call SciGenes. It's to look at this notion of natural talent. Why are some people just naturally flagrantly psychic, and why are some people really good at magic and so on, and others aren't, even if they're doing the same practices? Well, this is talent. Some aspect of talent is based on your genetic inheritance. I mean, it's very clear. You certainly see this in sports, that the progeny of people really good in sports will probably be pretty good in sports. I'm not at all. But I come from a family that was very good in art and music. So I was very good in art and music. Okay. So what is it then in folklore in every country in the world that some people come from families that have some kind of psychic ability, and then the kids do too? Well, that suggests, again, some kind of genetic component. So the Side Genes Project is looking for people who have these talents from families that have the talents. We get their DNA. We compare them against people who don't have the talents and don't have families of that, and we're finding differences. That suggests that there's a genetic makeup. And so one of the reasons I got interested in genetic engineering was, can we create a means by which we artificially create a talent? Well, we have the capacity to do that now. The genetic engineering is so amazingly precise that we decided we didn't want to jump directly into enhancing psychic ability because we don't know yet what genes are involved. Probably hundreds of genes are involved, not just one. So we decided to take something which is a little bit simpler, which was to address memory disorders and anxiety and other psychiatric disorders, which are, relatively speaking, a lot easier to fix. So we've created a therapy, and we're moving into doing clinical trials with it now, an intranasal delivery of a genetic edit that targets only one of the receptors in the brain and significantly improves memory and reduces anxiety at the same time. So in the future, based on what I know and what I've learned so far and been tracking the rest of the world now, the medicine of the future, not even that far in the future, the medicine of 10, 15 years from now, will be much, much more effective and much more precise than what we currently have today. It will also then push not only into disorders, but into enhancement. And now there's a giant ethical issue, right? Do you want to become a genius? Take this nasal thing and now you're a genius. Well, if it costs $1 billion to do that, well, then, it's just going to make things worse. So one of the things that we figured out early on was, if we create a cure for some genetic disease, there are 10,000 known diseases that are caused by a single gene. We can go in and we can fix that gene. Like, we know that we could fix sickle cell anemia. It's gone, it's cured. It costs a lot of money to get up to that point, and then what do you do? So we're focusing on things like dementia, because it affects hundreds of millions of people. That means that the cost of it will be much, much, much less. So a lot of the research in this area is focusing on rare disease, because we can fix it. We're focusing on huge populations with a huge need, because we know then that the cost of it would be comparable to taking some kind of pharmaceutical pill or something, but be much more effective. And then meanwhile, in the back of our mind, we're thinking, well, at what point will we learn enough about talent, not only psychic or magical talent, but in any area? Well, we could do it permanently or we can do it temporarily. So, and it depends on whether you're doing a DNA or an RNA edit. So we're doing RNA edits because we don't want to permanently change somebody, but in principle, you could. So, it's a whole new future. Nobody has figured out what that future looks like. We're dealing with the ethics. We're trying to understand it and see if there are good ways of regulating or protecting how this technology is used, but the genie's out of the bottle.
And you said it's only 10 or 15 years, potentially.
Given where we are today, yes. 10 or 15 years, there are already treatments, genetic treatments for various kinds of things. So far, mostly for orphan diseases, rare diseases. But there's a lot of energy and money going into development of not necessarily a cure, but a very significant treatment for the whole range of psychiatric disorders. And other things, like a liver disease and cancer and everything, just any kind of medical thing you can think of. We're going more into the mental space because that's our interest. But there's a huge amount of effort going into these areas, yeah.
Well, we have plenty to talk about next time. Then I will do my research there and find out what you guys are up to. But listen, it's always a pleasure, and I can't wait to do it again. Thanks for taking the time, and we'll see you next time.
It's been my pleasure.